Good evening to you. Welcome to Friday Conversations, part of the King's Church Ministry. If you're visiting us for the first time online, my name's Clive, one of the leaders, and I'm with Fiona, my wife, and we'll be sharing in this discussion. This is the fourth in a series on this book called Blessed, Broken, Given, and it takes the symbolism of Jesus taking bread, blessing it, breaking it, and giving it to his disciples as a way of interpreting what God is doing in our lives. And on the back cover it says to be blessed is to recover your true identity and calling, to be broken is to be opened up to the grace of God and a community formed by his grace, and to be given is to discover your mission for the life of the world. We have quite a big agenda this evening. We're covering two chapters. The first is called Shadows and Shame, and we'll look at that. Then there'll be an interval with notices and a song, and after that we're looking at suffering and pain. You'll do well to get the book and read the whole substance, because we can't cover everything, and obviously in the time limited we can't cover everything to do with shame. There are some questions that accompany the book, and we'll throw some in, but the sort of thing that we'd be talking about is discovering the difference between feeling frail and actually failing. Difference between frailty and failing, which is very interesting, and the different kinds of shame. The shame was associated with guilt, and there's a very interesting point where actually shame can be a very beneficial and healthy thing. So this part before the interval, let's begin with shadows and shame. Do you want to start the ball rolling on this? Oh, sorry, I'll give you the book.
Yes,
okay.
Yes. Oh.
I lost the page. I lost the page. There we go.
Yes, this is the beginning of the section of the book talking about being broken. The previous episodes have dealt with being blessed. And it starts with the author talking about a time when he was really struggling in his ministry and having a conversation with his spiritual director and really feeling in quite despair, wasn't he? And the spiritual director asks him the question, do you think it's okay for you not to be okay? And he said, I've underlined it. I knew the right answer, but knowing up here the right answer doesn't necessarily mean that you really feel it's okay sometimes to not be okay, does it?
So that's an interesting question for all of us. You know, realistically, how did he phrase it? Do we know it's okay?
Okay for you not to be okay.
It's a simple yes or no, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, in honesty.
Yes, because he was talking about the pressure of needing. Well, obviously he is a church leader and high-profile speaker, all the rest of it, and in a sense, the need to sort of project the public image. And you were talking earlier about, actors and comedians. People watching, and you can write in if you've logged in on the YouTube. There's a live chat. You can add your comments, questions, and you might know examples. Because what this shadow is, when everything isn't bright and cheerful and wonderful in the garden, isn't it? Yeah.
It's not Psalm 23, but when we walk through the valley of the shadow.
Yeah, and talking about ourselves, as he says here, there's a version of ourselves that we're pleased with and proud of, and there's a version we don't really like, that we'd like to keep in the basement away from the light.
Yes.
And psychologists and counsellors will sometimes refer to this as our idealised self and our shadow self.
That's a very good. Yes. If you might be able to mention other people as well, but often it's the Achilles heel of comedians that they project themselves as the life and soul of the party, put them on a stage, and they can command an audience, but in privacy they crumble and they crush. Yeah. Tony Hancock was an example of that. Example of that. You might know other people who've suffered that.
Yeah.
And one of the comments they make is, I've written it down, the greater the projection, so the brighter the light that you're living in, the darker the shadows can be.
Yes.
And that need to always project this image that I'm coping and everything is wonderful.
Yes. And actually, if we're going to allow the Lord to be using us and shining through us, and this time we're talking about the bread being broken in order to be given out. It's actually being willing to deal with him in reality, and to accept that the reality encompasses both.
Yes, yes. I heard a very interesting program where Elton John was interviewed, and we know his ability to be a performer and entertain multiple thousands of people, and he was saying, put him on the stage, give him a piano, put the lights on, and the magic works. But behind the scenes, he was terrified, and that led him to taking alcohol and then drugs, and he became addicted to drugs. He doesn't take drugs now, but it was that change.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's the question that's put
on
here.
Yes.
It says, have you ever come up against your limitations or felt overwhelmed? And if somebody feels they would like to share a bit about that, we would be very happy to have the comments coming in.
It's not in the book, but Fiona and I have been talking, and we like the film The Madness of King George, don't we?
Yeah.
And if you know the scene, then he suffers from an illness where he makes his behaviour very bizarre. Yeah. But then when he recovers, what did the servants say?
One of the servants said to him, "Oh, Your Majesty, you seem more yourself today."
Yes.
Or something, and he said, "Yes, I suppose I do seem more. Of course, I've always been myself."
That's right.
But perhaps I seem more myself today.
and the person who lives in the limelight or wants everybody to see the good side is the same person who's living in the Shadowlands, isn't it?
Yes.
We are. That's who I am.
Yes.
I'm not. Yes.
Yes.
And that's the person that God deals with.
Yes. And realizing that even in the sort of the brokenness of all this, that you're loved.
Yes.
As the person you are. The whole thing, that God actually loves and deals with the shadow and the other side of you.
Yes. Yes.
And as what he says here, the truth is there is only one self, one you, one me, and I am and you are deeply loved. Believing that and receiving that is how brokenness does not become a fracture. Instead, our brokenness can let the grace of God come rushing in. And then we go on to this bit about the frailty and failure.
Yes.
Something.
Yes. Yeah. Reminds me of that verse in Corinthians that God's strength is made perfect in weakness, or the prophecy that a broken reed he will not despise,
not break.
Not break. We actually can come to God.
Yes.
In our what was the difference? Frailty and failure. Yeah.
Yes.
Feeling frail.
Yes,
it's that question there.
Yes,
feeling frail.
In your experience, and I wonder if somebody might have a comment to make on this. In your experience, what's the difference between feeling frail and actually failing? So, yes, if some comments come in, we'll read them out in due course.
Yes.
Yes, so this is when it takes this bit about Jesus.
I was thinking, no.
I was just looking at, when it talks about Jesus taking the bread and blessing it, which we've seen, but then he broke it. And so the difference, between being, in that sense, being broken, it's not necessarily because you're failing, although it may be sometimes that we are failing, but the difference between our frailty and our failure.
Madeline makes an interesting comment. She's talking about problems that we all face at times. But she said, I thought as a Christian it was wrong, to have those periods of frailty.
And so she's sort of tried to squash it.
Squash it, yes.
But that doesn't deal with it.
It doesn't deal with it, no. And in the church community, we try to create a space where people feel safe to be themselves. I know as a church leader and as a preacher, there's a great pressure that you are the person with the goods, and you can't be seen to be having a shadow time or a frail time. But that helps nobody if we're putting on a mask, if we're putting up a front. Not that it's always appropriate to allow everything to dominate.
No, exactly. It's not that you want to sort of do all your navel gazing on the platform. That's really not helpful. But yes, but the need to sort of always feel as if you've got everything sewn up when you haven't can be very sort of restricting.
Yes. There was before Fiona spoke, I was just looking at my notes, remembering one of the phrases in this book, where it is not a sin to be mortal.
No.
We are still have this treasure in earth and vessels, and we do experience those times of weakness. Well, Paul himself, when he went to Corinth, that whole thing about I didn't come with powerful words in fear and trembling. Actually, there was a measure of uncertainty about him.
That's right.
And then God's power is made perfect.
That's right.
Through his weakness.
Yes, and sometimes it's really necessary that we feel our own frailty, so that we're not tempted to lean on our own strength and do everything under our own steam. Maggie's put in a good comment here.
Yes.
Feeling frail is knowing that we're in situations beyond our natural ability. Failure concerns sin when we deliberately turn from God. And I think that's a very good distinction, Maggie.
Yes. Yeah. Worth reading again.
Yes, I'll read it again. Okay. Feeling frail is knowing that we're in situations beyond our natural ability, where we're going to have to lean on God.
Yeah.
Failure concerns sin when we deliberately turn from God. So yes, it's not all right to sin.
No.
But being frail may actually make you lean on God, because you're not thinking, I can handle this.
Yes. And she goes on to say, she agrees that it's good for preachers to be honest. I've met Christians who say it's wrong to be depressed, feel sad, etc. This does so much harm. Yes. So within the time, do we need to be talking about the shame, or have you got something more?
Yes, we need to. I'm just thinking, if we just finish with that, that's a very good.
Okay.
Good quote from the book here.
It's on page 82. When you get the book, page 82.
Yeah. To be broken is to be opened up to grace, and that's the point of breaking the bread is not to sort of crush it, but it's actually so that it will be ready for use. It's opened up for God's grace to begin to soak up.
If I remember from reading the book, didn't he use that picture of some form of bread in some culture where they actually break it and then that soaks up the soup or the stew or whatever it is.
It was some kind of Malaysian bread, which is very soft.
Yes, the hard crust would prevent that from happening, but when it was broken, the softer inside allows the absorption.
Yes. And we need to look a bit at guilt and shame as the other bit.
That can arise from walking in the shadows, as some people have said. Yes. Keep going.
Yes.
She's doing well.
Well, because it's a thing that is sometimes levelled at the church.
Yes.
That we like putting people on guilt trips, and it's all a way of manipulating people, and the secularists would say this is the problem with religion, they just sort of get people all hung up with guilt and what have you. And it's, well, he said, to say it plainly, one common modern day view is that humans have been brainwashed by religion into feeling guilty and ashamed about things that shouldn't make them feel that way. Now, obviously it is true, I suppose, manipulating people by guilt and shame is something that has happened not just in the church, just in human society generally. But while acknowledging that there are sort of wrong cases, where the shame is not necessary and the guilt is just a way of manipulating, but somewhere deep inside you kind of know that that's not the whole story. That actually sometimes the shame you feel is because you are guilty, and dealing with the guilt is how to, rather than sort of trying to positive think your way into saying, no, I am a wonderful human being, and I'm absolutely perfect as I am, and all the rest of it, and doing the kind of the big obsession with self-esteem thing. Actually, sometimes it's really important to face up to the fact that maybe sometimes the shame is the right kind, a healthy shame. That's one of the things. What do you think about the idea that there's a good kind of shame, the shame associated with guilt? So how could shame be a good thing then?
It confronts us with the reality of who we are. And like what we were saying earlier, we're not pretending to be something else. Oh, that doesn't matter, it wasn't me or whatever. It was through, like in the prison ministry, when we do the restorative justice, it is confronting people with the consequences of their actions. Now, people say, oh, well, you're sending them down a guilt trip. But actually, inevitably, that process leads to a reconciliation and a healing and forgiveness. And good comes out of it. Well, I thought what you were saying about the first question that they ask, when it comes to looking at what they've done, is what harm has been caused by this? The course is called the Sycamore. I've referred to it many times. And the question isn't what law have you broken or what crime have you done, but what harm have you caused, and how can that harm be repaired? Which is, a more healthy approach to bringing restoration. Yes, that's right. It's not trying to load people with guilt. It's actually trying to help them find a way through the guilt. Through the shame by dealing with the guilt. Absolutely. Yes. Well, there's a verse. Oh God, this will show my ignorance of the Bible. When I acknowledge my sin in the Psalms, David, is that Psalm 52?
Could be 51.
51. Psalm 51 is the penitential psalm. It talks about.
Let me just say. Where are we?
You can see this is ad hoc.
No, I don't think he's...
Okay.
But he's talking about, I know my sin, my transgression is always before me.
Okay.
But
leave it there.
The bit about when... The particular question you're making.
So there is a right and healthy shame. And again, the author of the book says, when that happens, we need to say, what is the shame saying? Why am I feeling like this?
It's that's where it's important to distinguish one of the things he says here. Not all shame is the result of guilt. Sometimes it's actually unnecessary, and a lot of people, who put themselves on a constant guilt trip and actually need to sort of stop and think, no, actually I don't need to be ashamed here because I'm not guilty. But it says so not all shame is the result of guilt, but all guilt results in shame.
Sally's just put in Psalm 32. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you.
You ought to be here. Yes. That's worth. I think that's worth saying again. Not all.
Yes, not all shame is the result of guilt. Sometimes it is false.
Yes.
And you need to push it away. But all guilt results in shame.
Yes.
Because it's the appropriate reaction when you actually are guilty. And he gives quite a good illustration. I sort of think that we shouldn't be too ready to brush aside the shame thing, because it might be like the signals on your dashboard, the little light that's warning you of something like you need more petrol or your oil is running low or something, It's showing you something you need to address.
Yes. The I am going to turn to that psalm that Sally did, because I'd like to go to it. When I kept silent, this is it. When I kept silent, my bones wasted away. but then verse 5, then I acknowledged my sin to you and did not cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord. And then he finishes, rejoice in the Lord and be glad, you righteous, sing all you who are upright in heart. And yes, hiding it, actually, well, it does physically impact people.
Yes.
But being open.
Yeah. And being able to know that you can come openly before God.
Well, that's wonderful.
Even with that, and that, that he can deal with it.
Because the gospel removes the guilt and the shame. Yeah. We're thinking off the top of our head as well, looking at notes, but reminded of the woman caught in adultery, we understand the setup of that. But a shameful, embarrassing experience for the woman, but Jesus releases her from that.
Yes.
And he does so with so many.
Yes.
Says, go and sin no more, but actually restores dignity and wholeness to the person.
Yes, and it sort of talks here about, this is where under the Old Testament covenant, they had the priest who came and offered the sacrifice for sin to take away guilt in the temple, and here in Jesus we have all three of those summed up. He is the priest. He is also the sacrifice, and he's also the temple, the place of meeting with God. And this is where God has actually provided for us a way of dealing with this, so that we can have the peace, the shalom, the Hebrew word, where there's that sense of peace and things being right and restored again.
Yes. Well, it might not be appropriate in live chat and YouTube. But it would be helpful for us to remember the times when we've had to come before the Lord in honesty, and I think all of us could testify to that sense of relief, in a sense, and peace.
Yes.
I've met many people who experience that, and that is the good news of the gospel, isn't it? It is good news. It's not primarily to bring a message of condemnation.
No. But to bring a message of healing. But in order to receive that healing, you have to acknowledge the need for it.
That's right. Yes. That's why it's good news. Yeah.
So it's basically saying, let the brokenness open you up to God's grace.
Yes. Yeah. I'm aware of that. As I said at the beginning, we're only touching the surface really, of this subject. Those who've got the book, you can read it and meditate on it, because there's really a lot of helpful material in there, about walking in the shadow and dealing with shame. Also acknowledging when it's unhelpful shame, but recognizing there are times when that is the right experience to be going through. But it's not the end of the journey. So shall we
have our pause and then go to the next chapter?
We'll have our pause, and then we're going to cover the very small subject of suffering and pain. We'll say a few things about it, and hope that you engage with us in that. So we'll go to the notices and the song. Okay. Okay, so we're picking up on these two themes, shadows and shame, but now we're talking about suffering and pain. And it's not possible to type in a part of our life story, but one of the questions the author puts with this chapter is to think about our own experiences of suffering or pain, and not only just to think about it and to remember it as a sad experience, but actually what came out of that. What did we see that God was doing? So Fiona's going to begin to lead us in this area. Go on.
Well, yes, just sort of, again, quoting a little bit of what Glenn Packiam says, and then we'll talk about it. So we've already seen in the first half, there's a brokenness that can come from being frail and a brokenness that comes from our sin. And we looked at both those. But there's a third kind of brokenness, a brokenness no one chooses. It's the kind that comes from the brokenness of the world itself. It isn't just our frailty, our failure. It's the fallenness of the world. Mm-hmm. And it's that sense that, there's something deeply wrong with the universe, and that's what breaks us.
Yes.
And facing up the fact that, as Christians, we are not immune
I think this is
to
very
the
important.
effects of the fallenness of our world.
I'm just making a general statement, but we do hear people say, why did God allow this to happen to me? Or, if there was a God.
How can I believe in God when I'm suffering this?
And we are in the world. That is how the world is.
Yeah, we're in a fallen world.
And we are not immune from the tragedies of this world.
No.
And it's a fool's paradise to think that you are.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So this is sort of talking about when you're feeling the brokenness that isn't your fault.
No.
It's simply that you're suffering the same bereavement, the same vulnerability to accidents, the same vulnerability to other people's wickedness.
Yes.
To all
you're
the
just
disasters
caught up in it.
Yeah, you're caught up in a fallen world. And Jesus doesn't promise immunity to that.
Which is happening all the time, even today. Believers and non-believers, but including believers. Well, one of the charities that sent me emails were 21 Christians were killed. Was it today or yesterday? In an attack, not in this country but abroad. So today people are suffering.
Yes.
And sometimes we only emotionally think about that when it touches our world.
Yes.
But the whole world is experiencing this at the moment.
Because the whole world is in the fallen state.
Yes.
And so when it's our loved one that dies or our child that is sick, we sort of it comes home to us. Yeah. And then people who did believe in God when those things were happening to somebody else suddenly find they can't. You think, well, this is what we have to face up to, isn't it?
Richard makes the comment, God doesn't stop you, me, or anyone doing wrong things.
That's right.
And you might well be caught up in that.
Yes.
Or even natural disasters, because that's part of the fallen world that we're in. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So as he says, life has a way of leaving us parched and thirsty. The question is, what do we do with our thirst?
Yes.
Do we actually turn to God to seek our needs, or do we sort of rebel against him?
Yes.
And he quotes a lot from Psalm 42 and 43, which were probably one originally. I think it looks like it's more verses of the same when you go through. But there's a refrain in it which sort of says, I'll read it here in this version. Why, my soul, are you so dejected? Why are you in such turmoil? Put your hope in God, for I will still praise him, my Saviour and my God. And then in the midst of all this, there's still hope. And he says, the Lord will send his faithful love by day. His song will be with me in the night, a prayer to the God of my life. One translation actually says, God will command his faithful love.
Yes.
The Hebrew word is hesed. And there isn't an exact English equivalent. That's the thing, you have to put several words to explain it.
We know that name because it's when we bought our first house, when we were able to buy our first house, that's what we called it.
Yes, hesed, steadfast love.
Steadfast love.
God's faithful, steadfast love is what it means.
Yes,
Yes. And I think that's the first sort of sustenance that we have when we're being broken by these circumstances outside our control, is knowing that we are loved. Yes. And that God's love has not failed, and that's actually what we hang on to in the darkness. And
Paul's testimony, so he was, Paul in the New Testament, so he was subject to the activities and actions of so many people, nearly stoned to death, escaping for his life and all this sort of thing, threatened. I just forgot the verse I was going to quote. What did you say? Oh yes, I am persuaded that nothing can separate us from the love of God.
Shall death,
from the present, the future, life or death, angels, or anything in heaven or earth, nothing can separate us from the love of God.
Yes. And that's the kind of the bedrock, and the constant light at the end of the tunnel. Isn't it?
And you might not feel it at the time because our emotions, are real, and we've been through challenging and difficult times. We've been through some very, very sad moments, and you feel the sorrow of it, and you don't feel elated. I've met people who, again, because they think it's the Christian thing to do, have had tragic news. Oh no, everything's right, And the reality is, it is awful.
Yes.
It is awful, and it's okay to say this is awful. And I think that might be a releasing word for a lot of people. Yeah. It's okay to say, at the moment, life is awful, but
yes, there is.
Yes.
I'm still hanging in there with God. It's not a case of sticking a plastic smile on your face.
No.
Actually, there are times when you are walking through dark periods with real grief, real pain, with struggling perhaps with doubt and suffering. It is a real place of brokenness, but actually allowing God to speak to you there is so important. What does that mean?
Some very helpful comments. Maggie is saying sometimes when bad things happen, we have to make a conscious decision to trust God, whatever our feelings.
Yeah.
Yes. I will choose. Yes.
Yes. It's not denying our feelings, but it's not allowing our feelings to dictate our choice.
No.
That's the different thing. And I mean, it's obviously easier when. That's why I think the question about thinking back to when you've experienced something like this, it's actually helpful, and the longer you've lived and the more of these experiences you have, if you've actually walked through them, you have the strength of knowing what's happened in the past, which actually sustains you in the present. And there's a very interesting quote he has talking about holy wounds. He says, when you're in the dark place and you're in a wounded situation, you really need to be open not only to God, but actually to be able to share that with others. We're not suggesting people should sit in front of a camera and share with the entire YouTube audience their deepest pain and suffering.
No.
But actually to find within your fellowship, within your
safe environment,
your safe environment, somebody with whom you can walk through that and who can support and strengthen you when things are really tough. It's really important, and it's one of the ways that God gives us His steadfast love.
Yes. Where was it? It was the very likeable young woman from Christian Solidarity, Christian. She was CSW. That's it. She was saying that at times people have to lean on the faith of others.
Yes.
And I know a lot of people found that a helpful thing.
Yes.
When you talk about Christians who are suffering and being persecuted, that you actually lean on the faith of other people.
Yes. And the way that the Lord sort of puts us in a body, so that there will be some people who can be there because you're in pain, and then at another time you may be there because they're in pain.
Yes.
And you can support each other. And I was just looking at this, another bit I underlined in the book. It says, it's not difficult to show your scars, it's much harder to reveal your wounds.
That's worth saying again, because it's a short sentence, but people might not catch it.
It's not difficult to show your scars, it's much harder to reveal your wounds.
Because the scars have healed.
That's right. The scars are from past wounds, which have been healed and resolved.
Yes.
Whereas the wounds are what you're going through now.
And very sensitive.
Yes. And sometimes, actually, what you most need when you're wounded is somebody who has the scars that show that they understand what you feel, but they're not currently in such a mess that they can't help you. And likewise, when you're wounded, when you're with somebody who's going through wounds, it helps that you have the scars that show you understand. But at that point, you're able to be the one holding them up.
Yeah, and the support isn't to fix it.
No.
Okay, that's always a temptation. Somebody comes in quite a distressed state, and we think, or we imagine, we can fix it, put everything right. And we've discovered through many years of ministry, all you can do is be with somebody in that, and talk of the hope that we have in God. But we have to go through it.
Well, yes, because again, these are the situations where there is no nice pat answer. No. Here's the formula, and you'll be feeling wonderful tomorrow. The equivalent of, the antidepressant pills sort of thing that will make you feel different. Actually, no. In walking through the valley of the shadow of death, the comfort is knowing that He is with us.
And having said that, that's what we do for other people. Jesus Himself was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. He obviously came alongside people, but I'm sure we can really grasp the depth of sorrow and suffering, not just on the cross, but in His earthly ministry, the pain that He was feeling, and the personal attacks on Him. How did He deal with it? Being betrayed, being misunderstood, being accused, caused all sorts of things.
Yes, and that thing, as I said, nobody chooses to be broken in this way. No one wants that as part of their story.
No.
But we break because the world is broken.
Yes.
And you've got the whole cosmos that God created for blessing, is now enslaved to the powers of evil. It's not able to flourish like it was meant to. That's and when that fracture touches us, we get broken.
So we're having this conversation in November. In a few weeks' time, it's Advent, the Christmas, but it's the whole theology of the incarnation, that He came into the world and He became part of this world and really experienced the suffering. One of the Gospels, He was grieved by their hardness of heart. He just sensed the injustice and the inhumanity that was surrounding Him.
Yeah.
Are we going to mention the story of Lazarus? Are
yes,
we coming to that?
We're coming to that.
Because that would fit in well.
We're coming through to that.
Okay, sorry.
I'm trying to keep reasonably to the book.
She's in charge tonight.
No, it's talking this. The fact that God hasn't forgotten us.
Yeah.
He's not abandoned us, but He's actually involved with us. And it talks about. He talks about when Jesus was born. Actually. That carol that says, little Lord Jesus, no crying he makes, that's rubbish. All babies cry. It's the only way they can communicate. So He also knew the helplessness and the vulnerability of being a small baby, and arriving in a messy, smelly place surrounded by animals. Messy, helpless, crying. They're not the usual words we use to describe Jesus. But actually, it's like He is God coming among us, groaning and weeping with us. So he now begins to refer to the story of the raising of Lazarus.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
Or rather about Jesus weeping at Lazarus' death.
Okay, we're going to talk about that. If you know the story, Lazarus, a cousin of Lazarus has died, and he has two sisters, Mary and Martha, and they had hoped that Jesus would have prevented it. One of the questions that the author has put here, where is it here? What question would you have asked Jesus if you were Mary or Martha after Lazarus has died? So your brother's become ill, he's died, that Jesus...
Well, you sent for Jesus, but He didn't get there in time.
Didn't get there in time, because you'd hoped He'd prevent this from happening. What question would you have asked Jesus if you were Mary or Martha after Lazarus has died?
Yeah.
Because you have some comments on Jesus's reaction, don't you?
Yes. Yes.
Well, yes. I think that's your own study, not out of the book.
It is in the book, but you've
developed
read
it.
Yes. Well, he talks about, when Jesus finally came through to Mary and Martha, and of course both of them said the same thing to him, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. But actually we find that Jesus, this is the place where we get that shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept.
Yes. It's in John 11, if you don't know the story, it's in John 11.
John's Gospel, chapter 11.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he says, I knew the story in John 11 contained the verse Jesus wept, but I had not realised the other moments in the story when Jesus groaned right before and shortly after he wept. So that's in John 11 verses 33 and 38. And it's the New King James Version translates it groaned.
Okay. Let me just see what I say.
Yeah. It's in the middle of page 103.
Yeah, 33.
Oh, sorry, you were looking at that.
Yeah. Yes, in the NIV, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. But that translation says he groaned.
He groaned. And when I was reading that, I was sort of thinking about when Paul talks about the whole creation groaning in travel, and actually we're also a groaning with it, but that groaning is actually a somewhat different one. That's the groaning of inward unexpressed sorrow. But the word that's actually used in John 11, it's he says it sounds like a grunt, an inarticulate moaning or sighing, like the sound an animal might make. But in fact, according to the Greek word that's used, this is a sorrow which has an element of anger in it.
Right.
Because there's some translations actually put something about him being indignant or something, but it's like there's the groaning of the sort of, oh, I'm in pain, and then there's the groaning of, oh, you know, this should not be.
Right.
And I think that's we see there something of God's emotion at the whole business of the rule of death and the result of sin and evil. Is that this thing here and his anger at death itself. And in fact, we're told in Scripture, that death is the last enemy to be destroyed, and actually that death and Hades are going to hell.
Yes. Yeah.
They're thrown into the pit towards the end of Revelation. So Hades is not hell.
No.
Hades is going to hell.
Yes.
That's the sort of the thing there. And so it's almost like you see here God entering into the brokenness of this world, entering into the grief and the pain of it all. And entering into the sense of this is wrong, this is awful, and also this is awful because it's so painful. Weeping.
Which answers a bit. Where is God?
Yeah,
He's actually right there, experiencing it,
and in it with you.
Yes,
that's the thing that He's not far off. He's actually right there, and when you're weeping, He weeps with you. And there's a song I was listening to recently. It says, weep with me. I don't need answers. I just need to know that you weep with me, that you care. That you're there. And again, that's in that brokenness. It's like He can enter in, and His grace can come in, and again, something can come from it.
Yes.
Which is actually positive and is moving towards the healing and resolution of it all. Sort of the fact that He's taking on our brokenness and dealing with it, and He's actually going to deal with that last enemy.
Yes. Which is a different perspective where Mary and Martha may be looking for a preventative cure so that Lazarus didn't die to stop this tragedy happening. But we know, if you know the Bible, Jesus said actually that God's glory is going to come out of this.
Yes.
And Lazarus was raised back to life. He wasn't resurrected. He didn't have a resurrected body, but he was brought back to life. And then because of him, many people became believers in Jesus as well. So Mary and Martha are going through this, but the outcome is good. And again, I know many people who said, I wouldn't, having come through it, I wouldn't wish this on anybody, but having gone through it, I wouldn't be without it.
Yeah. Well, I remember, I can't remember who it was, but it was a thing that stuck in my mind. Somebody who had lost their legs, and as a result of losing their legs, obviously their whole life had changed, but they had, become quite a...
Yeah.
It was one of these famous Christians, but I can't remember who it was. But somebody said to him, so are you saying then, that this was a good thing, losing your leg? How do you feel about it? And he said, well, if you're saying to me, would I like to have 2 good legs today? Yes, I would. But I wouldn't have been without the experience I gained through losing them.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that's...
Yes.
That was the thing, that actually beginning to see that while this thing in itself was awful, what God has brought out of it is so precious that I wouldn't want to have not had the experience.
Which is, it's one of the glories of the gospel that we preach, that God can turn things round. You meant it for evil, but he purposed it for good.
Yes.
Other faiths must make their own assessment of suffering and pain, but the Christian view of it is actually God is involved in it, and if we allow him to, it can be for our good and for his glory.
Yeah.
Not that we want to choose to go down that path, but if we do.
Yeah. Well, exactly, as he says, in the case of Lazarus, it wasn't like Lazarus was an enemy of God or a wicked man.
No.
And Mary and Martha were we
genuine.
can totally understand this, as saying, why didn't you prevent this, Lord?
Yes.
And that's what we so often want God to do. We want him to prevent things, and of course sometimes he does, and probably a lot more things than we realise, because most of the time we don't know what we've been spared from, do we? Yeah. But sometimes we actually realise, that God's done something in the way of a prevention thing. But God does something bigger than that. He says he's talking about God does something that he knows is stronger than prevention, something we call redemption. And that's a bigger thing than prevention. Do you want to say any more about that?
Yeah, well, I just want to give credit to people who are making comments. Jim, rightly quoting verse 25, in that situation, Jesus gives these famous words, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. That, looking through the experience of death or whatever it is, actually we come through to life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Jim.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And actually that's come to us in Jesus, hasn't it?
Yes.
That's the key thing there.
Yeah. Anna just mentioned Smith Wigglesworth. I'm not sure it was him. He might have known the person there. Anyway, let's carry on with this prevention and redemption. Yes.
So it's really, I think, you see, when he raised Lazarus, Lazarus would die again.
Yes.
It wasn't, he didn't have a resurrection body in that sense.
No.
But obviously what Jesus has done is to actually defeat death itself. He's done something bigger. With the redemption. And it talks here, resurrection doesn't tiptoe around death. It breaks death's power completely. Resurrection is the reversal and undoing of death. That's the power of redemption. Just as resurrection is stronger than death, so redemption is more powerful than prevention. And I think that's... I'll give him another quote here. It's one kind of power to say, you shall not harm me. It is a wholly other kind of power to say, do your worst, I will prevail. Which is what God says through this business of redemption. Yeah.
I'm just pausing. No, okay there. We're nearly through with time. Most of the book is underlined, as Fiona's read it. So, are there any more salient points?
Well, this is sort of the conclusion he's coming to. Quotes St. Augustine: God judged it better to bring good out of evil than not to permit any evil to exist.
Wow. Yes. And
it's the tension we always have to hold, that that actually the problem of evil, God has said the right way to deal with it is not to sort of prevent it all happening.
Because, as Richard has said, we all do wrong, so we're all wiped out.
Yeah, exactly. We would all have been wiped out, so would all creation.
Yeah.
But in fact, God is in the business of redeeming, and almost in the sense that the more evil displays itself in its true colours, the more the light shines.
Yes.
You know, and obviously, eventually, the light will completely eclipse the darkness. That's what he's. That's the final point.
Yes.
But in fact, it's not that the darkness was never there.
No.
It's actually that it will be completely eclipsed.
Because that picture in Revelation, which is often quoted, there will be no more tears.
Yeah.
Which is very moving, isn't it?
Yeah.
There'll be nothing.
Yeah.
To bring that pain and that sadness and sorrow.
And the thing that always moves me about the bit in that, it says that God will wipe the tears from their eyes. So it's not just that there won't be any, it'll be brushed away. Actually, when you wipe the tear, it's dealing with it.
I recognise they were there.
It's a recognition of why the tears were there, and it's actually resolving the issue rather than just sort of preventing it all happening in the first place.
Yes, yeah.
You know, and it's how he brings together our freedom to choose, and yet his sovereign ability to, he uses this, imagine a chess player unafraid of his opponent's strategy. It's a certain kind of genius for a chess player to block the moves his opponent wishes to make. It's a different order of brilliance altogether to say, whatever your move, I'll still put you in checkmate.
Yeah, and that's God.
Yes.
Yes. We've covered a lot of very deep subjects in a
very
short time, but it might have generated some thoughts and some responses in those who are watching either tonight or in catch up. But it is this picture, and it's one of the merits of this book. It says on the back cover here, glory in the ordinary. So we've got this very simple picture of Jesus taking bread and breaking it. So we've looked at that he blessed, gave thanks, but then the bread is broken. And then what we said at the beginning, that this is sort of a metaphor, a symbolism of what God does or allows to happen in our life, that actually being broken is not necessarily a bad thing. And actually it might be a better thing for then his glory to shine through, rather than our own self-sufficiency.
Because the purpose of breaking the bread is so that it can be shared and bring life.
You might find this a difficult thing to accept or even to agree with, but God might allow circumstances in the world, in life, to break us. He might allow that.
Yes.
He might not prevent it. Have I got two double negatives? He might not act.
Might not prevent.
He might not prevent it. He might allow it. But then in the allowing of it, with his hesed love, the steadfast love, working for our good in it.
Because it always triumphs in the end.
Yes.
That's just like this chess player, as I say, you can.
Yeah.
It isn't that he dictates the opponent's moves.
No.
The opponent can do everything, and the opponent might even be very clever.
Yeah.
But he's better. He can still do it. He can still defeat him.
We're very grateful for the comments that come in, and very kind throughout every session that we do. People express their appreciation. Maggie said thank you, really encouraging and plenty to keep on thinking about. Yes, we've only dropped seeds in, and this is the substance of life that we're talking about, isn't it? It's this is a common experience, the shadows and shame, the suffering and pain. At some point, we're all experiencing that.
Yes.
So it's an ongoing process.
Yes,
and we haven't tried to fix everything. Trying to give a perspective of what the Lord is doing.
Yes. And so getting it here,
Last comment.
Yeah. Okay, I'll read a little bit from the end just to finish it off then. Whether the brokenness is from our frailty, our failure, or the fallenness of the world, we're still God's image bearers, and this is still God's world, the world that he created, the world that he blessed. The sin and suffering God did not prevent are not beyond his capability to redeem, and what God blesses, he will redeem. He has the power to make his blessing come to pass over and against the infection of evil. God the Creator blesses. God the Redeemer carries the blessing to its completion, even through the brokenness that comes. So,
Amen. Well, we just want to ask that as we've shared truths from Scripture and truths from Christian experience, that you're blessed, and that's been helpful to you this evening. There is another Friday conversation next week.
Yes.
Other people, somebody will be here. I'm not quite sure who. Somebody will be here and carry this series. Okay. If you haven't got the book, there's still time to get it. There's quite a few chapters to go. Blessed, Broken, Given by Glenn Packiam. Okay. Good night to you, and God bless.
Yeah. Bye.